Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Lewis and welcome to my channel. I'm just out here this morning to check out the garden. So it is just after New Year's Day here in Pennsylvania, so it's pretty cold. But with about 60 days left in the growing season this past year, we decided to put some kale down and some Swiss chard and some lettuce. And surprisingly enough, they are doing absolutely great here. So here's our bed with the Swiss chard, and you can see it actually looks gorgeous. It is still doing really well here. It's still got that crunch to it, and we're very impressed with this. It's January, and in Pennsylvania, we're having frost, you know, nights below zero I mean, there's ice all over here. Here's another couple of our raised beds, and I mean, this kale looks incredible. Kale is actually a really cool thing to plant in your garden, especially if you have pretty cold winters, because as soon as the frost hits and these experience frost, they actually tend to get a little bit sweeter. And I've noticed that kale after a frost is much better than kale before. Now I will be doing a full video of a garden tour, a sort of winter garden tour. Maybe share you in on some of the things that we do during the winter here that we plan on doing for the winter in our garden slash mini orchard. But for now, we're gonna leave that and we're gonna head inside, because today's video is about home brewing wine and bottling a batch of beer that I made about 2 weeks ago. So let's get inside in the warmth and get started. All right guys, so here we are in the kitchen. Today we have two tasks. We want to begin the process of making a blueberry wine, and we want to bottle a batch of beer that I made about 2 weeks ago. It's an American IPA and I made it from extract. So I want to go over a few of the things that you'll need to brew wine and to bottle beer. Brewing wine is very, very similar to brewing beer. Now, the equipment that you'll need is quite similar as well, so I'll go over a few of those things. All right, so the first thing you're gonna make sure that you do is you wanna allot a decent amount of time on each day that you plan on brewing and bottling your beer or wine. So I have about 4 or 5 hours today to do so. You also wanna make sure that you decide to wear something that you don't mind getting dirty. Less so in beer, but a lot more in fruit wine, because there's a lot of stirring and mashing of fruit, and you don't want to get anything ruined. And the same goes for the room that you decide to do it in, which is why I'm doing it here in the kitchen. It's a lot easier to clean. So the first piece of equipment that you don't necessarily need, but I think it is very valuable, is something that I got gifted to me, and it's this. It is a brew journal. So in here, this is made for beer, but you can, it's really just a good template of keeping track of what you've done and how you've done it. So the first one, most beer extract kits will come with, you know, an instruction paper that you could surely hole punch and put in a binder. But I like doing it this way because it keeps it all in one place, and you just handwrite, you know, like your ingredients, your brewing notes, and all this sort of stuff. I think that these are relatively inexpensive, and you especially will want something to this effect if you are brewing your own fruit wine, because you do not want to forget what you've done if you come up with a really good batch. So here I'm gonna put all my ingredients in for my blueberry wine. I'm gonna take notes of everything that I do along the way, so that if it turns out being really good, I know that I can reproduce it, and if it turns out being really bad, I can know what not to do to reproduce that. So that's the first piece of equipment. So the second piece of equipment that you'll need to brew, mostly for beer, but I'm gonna do it with wine today, is this. This is a brew kettle. It fits, I think, roughly about 5 gallons all the way up to the top, but you will, if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, you won't need a kettle that's 5 gallons. So right now I have a bunch of mashed blueberries and strawberries in there with a little bit of sugar and some water. But this piece of equipment will come in very handy if you are deciding to do, you know, a mash or a boil for beer. Now this piece of equipment you will definitely need if you are making beer or wine or whatever. This is just a fermentation bucket. Now these ones are meant for fermentation, and they're food safe. You need to make sure that if you're going to make your own bucket, you get a food safe one. It is just a regular old bucket, but these have hydrometer readings and volumetric readings for gallons, which makes it a hell of a lot easier when you go to brew. And they come with a lid that has a hole drilled in the top with a little gasket that you will put this piece of equipment in, which is it's like an airlock bubbler. You slide that right in there, and that stops any gases from going in but allows CO2 to escape. This will be your primary fermentation vessel. You will also need some sort of spoon to stir things around. This is made for brewing, but it's just because it's really long. You don't need a super long spoon if you don't have a massive fermentation bucket that you're trying to get into. You will need a hydrometer. It's not really necessary. You can eyeball it and you can make fine wine without a hydrometer. But if you want to, say, label and package it and give it out as gifts or whatever, it's good to put the alcohol content on there. And this hydrometer, when you drop it in, it will tell you the specific gravity of whatever you're doing, which is pretty much the sugar content. It's total dissolved sugars. So that number will change during fermentation because the sugars will be consumed by the yeast and turn into alcohol and CO2. So this will be very useful. Use it once at the beginning to show you your sugar, and once at the end to show you the difference in that sugar. So this is very valuable. This is the most valuable thing you could use while brewing. It's just a sanitizer, an acid-based sanitizer, and this one is a no-rinse sanitizer, which is really easy to use. But if you do not sanitize everything properly, you're gonna end up with some funky stuff. So that is extremely important. You could get away with sanitizing everything with boiling water, but that is an absolute hassle. So this is a time saver, and it is extremely important to use. And pretty much last is a thermometer. So this is a scientific thermometer. You don't need anything this well calibrated or accurate. You do need it to be somewhat accurate, but it's just to tell you, that you've reached the temperature of your mash, or that your wort or whatever is now to an appropriate temperature for you to add yeast. Because if you blindly add yeast into a hot liquid mixture, you're gonna kill it off and ruin the entire thing. And so for the brewing day, that's really all you need, other than your ingredients and your yeast. And here I have a Premier Classique, which is made by Red Star, and this is just an all-purpose wine yeast. I went in and asked what would be best for blueberry wine. If you go into a homebrew store, you get on a forum, and so you want to make something, there'll be plenty of people that can point you in the right direction. And they told me that this has an alcohol tolerance of about 11% before the yeast begins to die, but after looking it up online, it looks like some people have got about 14 out of it. All right, guys, so we're gonna get started on the wine. I'm gonna get started on it now because I didn't grab ice to bring this wine down to the right temperature to add yeast. So I'm gonna have to wait for it and put it in multiple baths of cold water because I don't have a wort chiller that I could use or anything. So while I'm waiting for it to cool, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on bottling my beer so I can just get a few things done at the same time. So what we're gonna do is take this brew kettle and we're gonna bring it up to temperature. Now I'm gonna end up bringing this to boiling temperature so I can kill off any bacteria that's in it. I don't have any chemicals or tablets that I have on hand to be able to put in here to kill anything off in order to put my yeast in. So what I'm gonna do, bring this to a decent temperature and then throw some water in and my sugar that I have for my recipe, and then try and get that cooled down and bring it to 5 gallons, and that's about it for today. So in here I have, I think it's about 12 pounds of organic frozen blueberries that I got from Sam's Club. If you've ever been to Sam's Club and gotten the regular blueberries there, the frozen ones, you'll know that they are massive and they are delicious. So these are very, very good blueberries. And I also threw in about 2 pounds of frozen strawberries as well. And the reason I did that is because for a 5-gallon batch of fruit wine, you usually want to try and hit about 3 pounds of fruit to 5 pounds of fruit for each gallon. And I was only able to hit 12, not 15. So I had some spare strawberries on hand, and I think the flavors will go together pretty nicely. They'll still end up creating a red wine, and I'm pretty excited for it. So last night I took the blueberries out of the freezer and let them partially defrost. I then threw them in this kettle with about a pound of sugar, and then along with the strawberries and a little bit of water, and I let it sit overnight to sort of let them mush up and let the flavors mingle a little bit. So far, I have all of the fruit in this recipe in here, but I don't have all of the sugar. So what I'm gonna do is let this come up to speed. I'm gonna get some boiling water in my electric kettle and then build up, not too high, because I don't want to have to cool 5 gallons of boiling water. So I'm gonna see how far I can get with dissolving all of my sugar in the smallest amount of water that I can, so that I can just fill up the fermenter up to 5 gallons when I'm done. All right, guys, so we've got the water on the kettle. It'll take about 5 or 6 minutes to start boiling. We're gonna have to do multiple rounds of it. But you wanna make sure that you come in here every now and then and just stir this around so nothing burns on the bottom. You probably won't have that issue, but with something as gloopy as this, you'll wanna make sure to stir it around a little bit. And we're just gonna, every now and then, agitate that. Now, the reason that I haven't sanitized anything yet, I haven't sanitized this, is because this will be coming up to a boil, or at least very close to boiling temperature. And all of the bacteria in this should die. We shouldn't really have a problem with that. So we're kind of starting on a blank slate. Now, when I go to transfer this, after it's cooled down, everything that it comes into contact with after that, except the yeast, should be clean and should be sanitized. So go ahead and leave that and wait for our water to boil. This is going to take a few minutes to come up to a boil, and it sounds like my kettle's getting close, but you can use this opportunity to cut back on some time of your brew day. You can go ahead and get a sanitizer solution started in one of your buckets. All right, guys, so I've gone ahead and measured out the amount of sanitizer I need. It's 0.2 of an ounce for 1 gallon of water here. So I'm just gonna dump that in, swish around, just make sure that that's all out of here. Might as well just leave that in there as well. So that now is a good sanitizing liquid that you can use for the entire process here if you're smart with how you use it in your different containers. But that stuff is also no rinse. So if you got bubbles left over in your bottles when you're bottling, or in your bucket or whatever after you've done, you don't have to get rid of those. So I'm starting to get some bubbles forming here, which we're getting pretty warm. I'm gonna make sure nothing's burning on the bottom, but I'll tell you, the smell now is just incredible. It smells really, really good. So these are actually breaking down a little bit more now that it's heating up. So we will start to add our sugar in parts and our water in order to get to the proper recipe here. All right, guys, so our water is finished boiling here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take it. I'm gonna add it in here. And the measurement doesn't really matter too much at the moment, because we're gonna be building up to 5 gallons anyway. So we're probably at about 2.5 gallons in here so far. And I'm just gonna keep this going until it gets nice and hot, and adding my sugar in parts. Now, speaking of sugar, all right, so here's the sugar that I'm gonna use for this recipe. I wanna do about 2.5 pounds of sugar per gallon of wine that I make. Now, because my yeast is only really rated up to like 12% alcohol, somewhere in that range, I'm not gonna add as much sugar as a lot of fruit wines might have. They could have up to 3 to 4 pounds per gallon of final wine produced. So I'm gonna be doing 2.5, which will equate to about 12 pounds of sugar. So I'm gonna do 10 pounds of granulated and actually 2 pounds of turbinado sugar. Now the reason I'm using this is because I thought it was interesting. I had it on hand, and I think it might add a pretty interesting flavor to the wine. So let's go ahead and get started on adding this all up into our kettle. All right, so I've added my first batch of sugar in, which is about 6 pounds of granulated with about 2 pounds of that turbinado sugar in there. So that's total 8, plus the 1 pound of sugar that I put in yesterday when I was letting it sit overnight. So that's gonna be 9 pounds, and I wanna build up to 12. So I only need about 3 more pounds of sugar in here, which I don't think will be a problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my final bits of sugar measured out here, and then I will show you what we end up with in the kettle. All right, so we'll go ahead and get this last 3 pounds of sugar added in here. Now I can hear that this is starting to come to some sort of agitation at the bottom of the kettle. Now, you don't need to bring it up to a visual boil, because this will actually reach traditional boiling temperature of water at 100 Celsius before it starts boiling, because of all the total dissolved sugars in here. It'll actually boil at a slightly higher temperature than what we traditionally would think of boiling to be, but it doesn't even need to come up to boiling temperature, it just needs to be hot. Okay guys, so one thing to keep in mind is that our actual yield of completed wine is not going to be the same volume as what we put into our fermenter, because we still have all the pulp from those fruit in there, and those will be separated out of the wine later on. So it is important to, if you want to make 5 gallons, to really hit that 5-gallon mark, like well above it, like a good solid maybe 1/4 of a gallon above it, 1/2 of a gallon above it, or hit your 5-gallon mark and then deal with having a little bit less than 5 gallons, which is what I'll likely do. I might go a little bit over the 5-gallon mark, but my carboy, 5 gallons is right up to the mark. So I want to leave a little bit of headspace in there, so that I don't end up getting wine up in the airlock and stuff. So I'll show you later on what I mean by that. All right, guys. So we've made it up to about 82 Celsius, which is plenty hot for a disinfection of any wild yeast or anything. I'm not too concerned about any other bacteria being on here, because they weren't opened. They were opened out of the package and immediately put into a clean and sanitized kettle. So I'm not really, and they were covered overnight. So I'm not too worried about anything nasty being in there. So I think 81.5 degrees Celsius is plenty. I'm going to cut the heat, and I'm going to go ahead and prepare my sink for a cool down period. All right guys, so sides of your kettle might be a little hot, so make sure to grab towels or gloves. And we're just going to bring it over and place it in our cold bath. And it looks like it's overflowing a little bit. All right. A little more messy than I needed that to be. But we'll let that go ahead and start cooling down, and I'm gonna bring my thermometer over and sanitize it real quick. All right guys, so now that we've got our wine cooling down, or what's gonna be wine cooling down in the sink, it's time to move on to the bottling of the beer that I ended up brewing. So the first thing I'm gonna do is sanitize all of my bottles. So these bottles here I got from Amazon. It was like $30 for 24 of them, which is a little bit expensive. So I went out and bought just a bunch of bottled beers, and we had them over Christmas and New Year's. And these are Sam Adams ones, but I got a bunch of different type, like New Belgium and Blue Moon, things like that. Just want to make sure that they're the pop caps and not the twisties. So I have a bunch of these. They've been washed right after use, but I'm gonna go ahead and sanitize them now. And the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna use my bucket with a spigot with sanitizer, and I'm gonna run my racking probe into each of these bottles, fill them with sanitizer, dump the sanitizer into a bucket here, and then once they've all been sanitized, I'll let them sit just for a second, and then I'm gonna rack my beer into the second bucket that I have. So, see you in a minute. Alright guys, I've also gone ahead and sanitized my bottle caps that I'll be using today. So here I've got 48 bottles in total, but the yield's supposed to be somewhere around 55 to 60, so we'll just play by ear. I got plenty more bottles, but I don't want to sanitize all of them at once. They're going to be sitting here a little while. So another reason that I use this to sanitize was that my bottles, is that it's going to go ahead and sanitize itself. So we won't have to worry about that when it comes to getting our beer in and out of this this fermentation bucket where it's been for about 2 weeks. I had a little bit of an issue with this batch because this rubber gasket fell in one time. When I was fiddling around with this, I shouldn't have even touched it, but it did, and it fell all the way to the bottom in the trub. So I had to rack this into that bucket, clean this out, and get rid of the trub, and then find it, get it back on there, and then throw it right back, or throw it right back into here after I clean the trub out. So I pretty much did a secondary fermentation on this, but I'm at the point now where this guy's pretty much done bubbling. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my lid off, show you guys what it looks like. I'm gonna siphon it into this vessel here, and then we're gonna start bottling. But first, I'm gonna need some priming sugar. All right, guys, so here I have 2 cups of water boiling so that I can add this guy into my bottling bucket. So this is priming sugar. All it is corn sugar. You can really use any type of sugar to give you some carbonation when you bottle your beer, except lactose won't work, but sucrose and fructose will work. I believe that corn sugar is mainly fructose, which is what this is. You can really use anything, but this 5 ounces is going to work for my 5 gallons. It's slightly different for regular sugar, so look it up. There is a conversion. If you're going to use regular sugar for priming sugar, you have to make sure that you get it right. Refined sugar is a little more higher sugar content by weight than this is. So it's going to be a little bit less than 5 ounces that you'd need for 5 gallons. But this is what I'm using today because it came in the kit. But I think from here on out, I'm probably going to use regular sugar to cut back on the price, because this is especially expensive for what it is. All right, so it's looking like we're starting to come to a boil. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in. I believe I should probably add it in batches, and of course I didn't cut it properly. It looks like we're pretty dissolved here. Just wanted to make sure to keep it moving so that any sugar that was laying on the bottom after I poured it in didn't begin to caramelize or melt or burn instead of dissolve. This is looking pretty good here. All right, guys, so while our priming sugar is just cooling down a little bit, I don't want to add it scorching hot into the bucket. I'm actually gonna get started on the wine yeast because we're looking at about 36°C right now, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit thereabout. So that's coming down, and I'll change the water around in a second, but I went ahead and sanitized the jug. I put my yeast packet in the sanitizer, and I sanitized the scissors. And I put about a cup worth of lukewarm water, and I'm just gonna get the yeast started about 20 minutes before I'm gonna use it, maybe half an hour. So go ahead and cut the top off. I sanitized everything and drop the yeast in. Now, I wouldn't stir it at all. You just sort of let it sit on the top. All right, guys, so we've reached a point where our priming sugar solution for the beer has reached room temperature. It doesn't need to per se, but it's just to be safe, I just brought it down to room temperature. Our yeast has been sitting for over 20 minutes, and our wine mixture has come down to 28.3 Celsius, so we're getting real close with that. So I'm going to start bottling. Now, the reason I know that this is ready to bottle is because today I took a gravity reading and it came in at 1016. That's the same exact gravity reading as I got 3 days ago. So I haven't had any change recently, and the amount of bubbling or fermentation that's happening is extremely, extremely slow. For that reason, and because that number is below 1020, I'm gonna go ahead and bottle now. Now, you don't wanna do it too soon, because if you still have fermentation going and over a couple of days you still have change in your gravity reading, you can have bottle bombs, and those are messy and expensive as well. And you don't wanna lose the beer you've brewed, you don't wanna lose the bottles, and you don't wanna blow glass everywhere. So I gave it a couple more days just to be sure, and I got the same gravity reading. Okay, so that gravity reading of 1.016 or 1016 is gonna yield us a 5.7% beer. This, I mean, that's pretty much what I knew I was gonna get. I hadn't expected of 5.2, so it's a little bit off, but it's you know, brewing from extract, and I admittedly made a couple of mistakes along the way, but the way that I know that is that I just took a hydrometer reading. Since I'm using buckets instead of a carboy for this fermentation, I was just able to slip a sanitized hydrometer right into the bucket and take a final reading. My first reading, so my original gravity, was 1060, and my final was 1016. If you subtract the final from the original and multiply it by 131, that'll give you your alcohol by volume. So a hydrometer is very useful in the brewing of beer and wine if you want to have an idea of your alcohol by volume. And it's also very useful in telling when your fermentation is complete and you're ready to bottle. So the reason we do priming sugar is we're going to have a little bit of fermentation in the bottles that's going to create carbonation because the lids keep it under pressure. Right now I have my priming sugar in here, and here is my beer. So you're going to notice a little bit of extra stuff there. That's hops that I added about a week ago in a dry hopping stage. So I didn't put them in a hop bag. I could have, but what I'm actually going to do is when I siphon, I have a little bag here that I'm going to put over my siphon end, and it should leave most of the flour from the hop in the bucket, and hopefully we won't get too much trub at the end. So this is my siphon, and I've used it with sanitizer, so the inside is all sanitized, and I've just got it sitting here in a bath of sanitizer along with the hydrometer and such. These bottles have already been sanitized, and I've made sure to sanitize my caps. So I'm ready now. I've made sure the spigot is closed. I'm now ready to transfer into my bucket and begin bottling. So here we go. All right, so as you can see, this is just running on its own. And we're filling our bucket, and that is a gorgeous color, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful. So the reason that we are gonna put the priming sugar in first is that it just makes it easier. We don't have to stick anything in there to stir it up. It should homogeneously disperse within the mixture here. So this will take a little while. So I'm gonna go ahead and we'll see you when this is all full. All right, guys, so I've pretty much finished my siphoning. I was running into a little bit of trouble trying to get the last bit out of there. There's a little bit of trub at the bottom, not too much, so I don't think it'll be too cloudy. But my siphon just stopped wanting to work. It does that sometimes. So it looks here, I've got just above 4 gallons of output, which is a little bit concerning with the amount of priming sugar we put in there, but we're crossing our fingers with just having 4. So I got all my bottles here, and I'm gonna go ahead and start bottling. So let's get into it. All right, so now I've got my bottling wand here, and I'm gonna start filling up bottles. I did re-sanitize this, and I've had this wand sitting with some sanitizer. And before I fill a bottle up, I'm just gonna give it a little shake upside down, because there's still a little bit of star center in there. So we'll go ahead and do that. Make sure that the outsides of the bottles have been properly sanitized. So I'm gonna fill up a few and then cap them, and then fill up a few and cap them. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the wand in so that the beer fills the whole way to the top, and as soon as I pull the wand out, the displacement will create the perfect amount of headspace in each bottle. So I'm gonna grab my capper here, got my sanitized cap, and let's get bottling. All right, guys, we're almost done bottling here. I've probably got another ½ gallon to go. So I think I'll just about finish up these last bottles, but I've got all these capped. And we can now take a look at this. Has come down to room temperature. Oh, it smells wonderful. And the yeast looks about ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and transfer these over. All right, so I've gone ahead and sanitized my fermentation bucket and the lid. And now I'm gonna transfer this over to here. Be very, very careful. You don't want to splash everywhere. It's like very, very dark juice. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this in there. All right, so I'm gonna, still have a lot of residue in here. I'm gonna want all that. So I'm gonna swish some water in there and try and get it all out. And I want this water to be as close to room temperature as I can get it. Feels about good. All right, now we go ahead and backfill up to 5 gallons here. Now we can retrieve our hydrometer and actually take our first reading for specific gravity here. This will give us the original gravity. Now it's very foamy, and I wanted to do that because we need to aerate this solution so that the yeast have plenty of oxygen to feed on. I'm gonna go ahead and drop it in. And that is a very high specific gravity. So a specific gravity reading of 1.18 is gonna give us a potential alcohol of about 15%, which is a little higher than I was going for, but it's in the range for a fruit wine. So we're ready to pitch the yeast and ferment this thing.
All right, guys, so it's the following day. I'm going to speak a little quietly because I got people sleeping. It's about 6 a.m. So as you can maybe hear, this thing's going crazy. So I ended up pitching my yeast around 5 p.m., 4 p.m. yesterday. Immediately put a sanitized lid on it. I filled my airlock with Star San. And then I placed it downstairs in the room I typically ferment in, but it was getting very cold per night down there. It was, you know, about 63 degrees. I really want to try and keep it as close to room temperature as I can. And I keep a glass of water next to it because I don't have a temperature strip for this that I put on the outside. So if I keep a glass of water in the room at all times, I can take the temperature of the water and find out what temperature it is in the room. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so I'm getting about 18 degrees Celsius, which I believe is okay. I think I'd like maybe a couple of degrees higher than that. For this, I really want to try and hit like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's not bad. I mean, as we can hear, it's going pretty good. So I'm kind of just gonna let that sit now for the next probably what will be a week and a half until fermentation slows. Now, every day I want to go in there and there should be a layer of mashed fruit at the top. And I'm going to want to push that down and reintroduce it back into the liquid so that all of the liquid has contact with the fruit. But then when fermentation slows, I'll want to rack it into a carboy to allow for secondary fermentation, where it will sit for probably about a month, maybe 2 or 3 months. It just depends on your taste. So right now I'm in the only room in the house that doesn't have an overhead light. So forgive the lack of light. It's still early in the morning, so the sun's not up yet. But I wanted to show you the bottle situation from yesterday. So I'm keeping it under this towel. I'm weary of the amount of priming sugar I put in, so I really don't want to end up with any bottle bombs. So I have fortified this thing. I've got my sugar bags holding down 2 pretty thick towels, and I've got my bottles. I want to be careful doing this just in case. I got my bottles in these bags I got from Wegmans for 99 cents. But if you can see in here, I'm gonna risk it. I'll pull one up. So So I've got them all just sitting in there. I haven't labeled anything yet, and I do have labels that I am going to use on these beers. But I figured if they're gonna explode, I don't want to waste my labels. So I'm gonna leave them in here for 2 days, so room temperature. So tomorrow at night or the following day in the morning, I'm gonna move them over into the garage. And the garage is very cold at this point. It's only about 10 degrees warmer than the outside temperature, which every night drops below 32 Fahrenheit. So they're not cold enough. It won't be cold enough in there to freeze them, but it will give them a real good cold shock. It should filter all the trub, if there's any, down into the bottom of the bottle. And they'll stay there for about the remainder of the week, so about 5 days. And then I'll throw them in the fridge and give them a good chill, and that'll be it. All right, so in closing, I just wanted to mention that all of the music that you'll hear in my video was produced by me. Most of it I created. There's a couple of songs in there that my good friend Ben Kelkis, who goes under the name BennyOkay, you can find him on iTunes and Spotify and everywhere you want to find him. A couple of the songs he gave me guitar licks for, and I ended up producing around them. So definitely check him out. And if you want to check me out, I'll link a few areas where you can find my music, but I don't release everything that I make. I mostly just do it for fun. So if you had any questions about any of the music and whether it's released or you get your hands on it or anything, just leave a comment down below and I'll be able to point you in the right direction. Alright, and that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and you know what to do: like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Roll the blooper.
All right, guys, so we are here in my kitchen,